Without further delay, we're going to get started.
Hi. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for hosting me. It's very nice to have an opportunity to talk about this particular issue. Is everyone here a law student? Pretty much everyone? It's cool because I have a lot of ideas that are new to me that are going to be presented in this presentation. I'd love feedback from a law perspective. So hopefully it'll provoke you, hopefully it'll instigate your thoughts, and you can give me some feedback. So, has anyone never seen an undercover investigation, like footage-wise? Does everyone knows what we're talking about here? Yeah? Okay, cool. So what we're going to do, this is the agenda. At the bottom, I promise no graphic images. I know it's hard to talk about this kind of topic, so I don't want to scare people. I don't want you to run out of the room. But this is the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, some of the undercover investigations that I've done. I can't legally talk about all of them. How investigations change the laws, and ag laws. I'm sure most of you are aware of what those are. We will definitely talk about that and recent development in just January in the States. Animal rights law, what lawyers can do, and this is my favorite, the illegalization of slaughtering animals. Let that sit for a second. Do you think it's possible? It's the kind of world that I dream about every single day. And I think that it is possible. I think that we will actually see it in my lifetime. And I'm not immortal. I think that within 60 years, I hope. So I will predict and hopefully argue my points convincingly. And we will have about 30 minutes for question and answer. Okay. So, I'm Kevin Lahey, plant-based since 2002. In 1999, I sat way in the back, where you are sitting now, of a philosophy class, and the philosophy professor argued for the first time the case for vegetarianism. And I was the wise guy who was like, no way, all kinds of objections, didn't like what he was saying. I grew up as a meat eater. I grew up as a hunter. It was not abnormal for me to go into the woods and shoot a deer with a .30-30 rifle, gut it, skin it, butcher it, cook it, eat it, and then snuggle onto my bed with my dog and make sure that he had Christmas presents and birthday presents, and vow to do whatever necessary to harm other people if they harm just one hair on my dog's head. So I never made the connection until 1999. But for 3 years, I did nothing except think about the arguments that were presented. So I went vegetarian in 2002, and then in 2010, I was in South Korea, and I'll explain what happened there. But this is a little bit more background on me. I'm an American. Any other Americans? Yes. So, South Korea is where it all started for me. I was teaching ESL at a university, university students, and I came across a video of a dog being slaughtered for food. And it was really grotesque. So by the way, no graphic images, but the words that I say may be graphic, so prepare yourself. I'll do my best. But it was really violent and graphic, and I swore in that moment that I was going to do something. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something. It was an emotional moment. I grew up with dogs. I love dogs. And the way in which the dog was being slaughtered was terrible. So here I was, an American white boy, speaks one dialect of one language, don't understand the Korean history or the Korean language or the Korean culture. But I said I was going to do something. It's pretty audacious. And so I swore to do something, and I got a lot of people to sign a petition. I spent a year of my life getting people to sign a petition on the weekends. And a lot of people hated me for that, as you can imagine. I got called cultural imperialist more times than I can remember. Hypocrite, even though I was vegan at the time. But I thought, when you're at the beach and you pick up a bunch of sand, you don't focus on the sand that goes through your fingers. You focus on the sand in your hand. I don't know if Confucius said that first, but maybe it's me. I'd like to say I made that up. But a lot of people were stopping. They were stopping and they were signing. And so I was like, there's hope. There's potential for this particular issue. And so eventually it led to a full-time job in the animal rights community, where I became an undercover investigator in the Korean dog meat industry. But first, I want to ask you a question. If you Google cutest puppy ever, that's what comes up. So, this is an objective truth. If you were walking down the street and you saw the cutest puppy ever, and you saw a man with a baseball bat who was about to do terrible things to the cutest puppy ever, the question is, what do you do? What would you do? Some of you are saying I would get his autograph because you like Walking Dead and you like Negan. But imagine you don't know him. So there are three options. You can walk away, keep silent. You can act. Or you can pay him money. And for the majority of people in the world, it's like 90-something% of people, they pay money to that individual. And I knew in that moment in Korea, I wasn't paying to have dogs slaughtered. I wasn't consuming them. I wasn't contributing to that violence. So I felt like I was already at number one and I was good. By the way, number one is vegan, if you haven't figured out. But I wanted to do more, so I decided to do number two. And I thought number three is out of the question, right? And you think about it. It's like, I don't agree with what you're doing, but here's $20. Actions speak louder than words. So, I grew a beard. And I thought, if I was going to try to blend in, I needed some facial hair, maybe some tattoos, I don't know. I didn't get any tattoos though. And so those are the undercover investigations that I did. It was a little more than a year in Korea's dog meat industry. And then I worked for 2 years in USA's poultry and hog industries. Also, I did a case on an egg farm. But these are the cases I'd like to talk about today. So briefly, I'll talk about Korea's dog meat industry and the case that we did. I didn't speak Korean, so I needed help. And so I asked my friend, who was originally from Venezuela, but then he moved to New York, so he speaks Spanish and English. And then he moved to Korea way before I did, so he also spoke Korean fluently. So a trilingual partner is very useful. So I asked him to come with me, and I said, I don't know what we're going to say exactly, but we're going to try to get as far as we can into the dog meat industry and see how much they show us. So here's our backstory. sharing this for the first time publicly. We posed as Venezuelan dog meat buyers. That we were going to purchase dog meat from these Korean dog meat farmers, bring it back to our country in Venezuela, and start a business importing from Korea. That sounds crazy, it's because it is. But it worked. It worked because, and I've thought about this many, many times, it worked because greed always blinds anything else. Suspicion versus greed, greed will win. So they thought about the potential money they were going to make. And we became famous in the industry. Two white guys going throughout the entire country looking to buy dog meat. We didn't have to introduce ourselves anymore. As soon as we came up to the farm, they knew who we were. And so, before we started this investigation, very little was known about the Korean dog meat industry. Almost nothing was documented. Just a couple of slaughter videos. They didn't know how the dogs were bred. They didn't know how the dogs were kept or transported or slaughtered in all the other ways. So we got all of that information from every single province in the entire country. And then we released the footage. You can imagine how they felt about us after that. But in the moment, we became friends with them. We drank beer with them. We did shots with them. We smoked cigarettes with them. We went to, you know what Noribang is? It's a karaoke bar. We even slept at their houses because we had to be their friends. They had to trust us. And so, a year later, we released all the documentation, all the evidence, and before we started the investigation, 34% of the Korean public was in favor of a ban on dog meat. A year and a half after we launched our investigation, it got up to 48%, almost 49%. So we're this close to getting 50%. Almost half of the Korean public is now in support of a ban on dog meat. This goes hand in hand with what I'm going to talk about later, so remember that, staff, please. Okay, so then I went to the USA, and I became what I like to call an investigative journalist. Maybe it's a euphemism, but I think it's a better term. If you think about investigative journalists who go to Yemen or Syria to document human rights violations, they don't just go and get someone's word for it. They get evidence. They get audio testimonies, video footage. They get written documents, and they corroborate, and they hand all that evidence over to human rights organizations. That's what we do. When we do a case, it takes us 6 months. So if you want to do one case as an undercover investigator, it's 6 months of your life. And during that time, you build a case. You start with paperwork. You start with audio testimonies. Every single day I would take a shot of the newspaper. I would go to the convenience store, pick up the daily newspaper, and I had a camera hidden on my person. Take a shot of the day, and then a shot of the actual facility, so that they knew I was working at that location on that day. And so that's just one thing that I did every single day. And so we built up this entire case before we handed over to law enforcement. And so why is there a picture of Sunkist and oranges? I'm not picking on Sunkist, I just like this example. Sunkist says their OJ is made from real Florida oranges. Imagine somebody says, "Really? Can I see?" Can I see how they're made? Can I see where they come from exactly? I would like to know that they come from Florida before I purchase your product. I'd like to know that you're really using oranges and not artificial flavors and sweeteners. And imagine Sunkist said, no way. No way can you know that? No way. I mean, we'll tell you. Sure, we'll tell you it's real. But do you want to know on your own? You want proof? No way. In fact, we're going to make it illegal for you to come to our facility and take any kind of picture or video footage. Imagine Sunkist said that. How would you feel about the company? How would you feel about that orange juice? You'd be like, man, they're hiding something. In fact, Sunkist is very transparent, and I'm just picking on them for the sake of this argument. And they have all kinds of different oranges and different seasons in which they acquire the oranges in different places of the world. But imagine if that was their stance. That is exactly the stance of animal agriculture. This is what, to me, the animal rights movement is all about. It's about transparency. And I promise no graphic images. Cartoons don't matter, right? Is that okay? Transparency is what we would want from Sunkist, right? We would want them to show us exactly how the oranges are made and where they come from. Now think of the recent development in the USA with Black Lives Matter and the police brutality that has come to the surface. Before we had video cameras on our phones, everyone has a video camera now, which is super powerful. It was the word of a police officer versus a dead victim. Maybe some physical evidence could put that guy in jail, but they could just move things around, I guess. But now, we have video footage. And the only reason we know about police brutality in recent years is because someone was brave enough to pull out their phone and take a picture, and take a video. And so, imagine this. Imagine the police force collectively said, yes, you're right, there's tons of police brutality, and this is how we're going to deal with it. We're going to say anyone who takes out their phone and videotapes any interaction between a police officer and a civilian is going to go to jail, and we're going to confiscate your phone. Imagine that was the response from the police force. You'd be like, what the hell is going on? It's a 1984 dystopia. But again, that's exactly what the animal agriculture industry does. When they see investigations, documented evidence of animal abuse, their response is to outlaw the whistleblower. Okay, so a little bit about dog meat. Does anyone know if dog meat is legal? Want to take a guess? In Korea? Not here.
Legal?
50-50 shot. But I lied because both would be wrong. It's not legal or illegal. It's a trick question. It's somewhere in the middle, although as lawyers you probably know, I call you lawyers even though as a philosopher, I was practicing philosophy, so I was technically a philosopher. You're lawyers. If somebody says there's no law, there is no law. There is no law on the books that says you cannot eat daffodils, for example. Therefore, by default, it's legal, right? Something, in order for it to be illegal, it has to be explicit on the books for it to be illegal. So because there's nothing explicit on the law books saying that dog meat is illegal, it is by default legal. But it's not technically legal either because all the other farmed animals are covered under the Humane Slaughter Act, and a couple of other acts. So it's somewhere in the gray zone, which I thought was interesting when I found out. But again, we're almost at a tipping point in Korea, and they think that there will be a law passed within the next 5 years. The current president is actually in support of that ban. Okay, pig farm. Everything you see up there is 100% legal. Does anyone know what a gestation crate is? So gestation crates are tiny little crates, and the pigs can't move. They can't turn around. They can just stand up and lay down. And Temple Grandin, who is one of the spokespeople of the meat industry, has said a gestation crate is essentially like asking a human to sit on an airplane seat for her entire life. Imagine that. In economy. That would be a horrendous hell. You can't get up and go to the bathroom either and stretch your legs. Like, you are stuck in that seat. Farrowing crates are basically the same thing, but there's a little bit more leg room. So it'd be like going to the exit line, I guess, where you get like a little bit more leg room. And the only reason they do that is because that's when the piglets come. So the pigs are gestating in the gestation crates. They're pregnant for about 4 months. And then right before they give birth, they go to the farrowing crates and they give birth to the piglets. But again, even in the farrowing crates, they cannot turn around. Clipping teeth without anesthesia, tattooing without anesthesia, castration without anesthesia. The men in the room, I hope you're squirming a little bit. Every time I think about it, it's just, if you don't know what that is, look it up. I don't want to explain it. Castration and anesthesia, without anesthesia, put those two things together, and that is a horrible, horrible nightmare. Now imagine a poorly skilled, untrained worker who gets minimum wage and works 10-hour shifts, who may or may not be still drunk from the night before, is using a dirty, dull blade to do castration without anesthesia. You can imagine the botched castrations that happen. So I bring all this up because this is legal. And what's interesting here, I think, is that what's considered legal is considered legal because everyone does it. So they didn't say, all right, we do X, Y, and Z, so therefore let's make laws saying X, Y, and Z is legal. No. Whatever everyone is doing, therefore defines legality. So if everyone is doing X, then X is legal. And thumping, to me, is the least of the evils. If you don't know what thumping is, it's taking the back legs of a piglet and thumping her head into a concrete floor, and it's a form of euthanasia. It's a form of killing quickly. It's because the piglet is going to die. So think about that. The least evil thing they do is slam piglets' heads into the concrete floor. It's craziness. So we'll talk about how I think we could potentially change this. But first, my daughter. I feel like it's a good time to brighten things up. I put her there because I want to talk about something light right now, but I also put her there because she came into my life while I was working at a pig farm. My wife sent me a text at 5:30 in the morning while I was shoveling pig shit, and she said, I think my water broke. I said, go to the hospital. I told my boss. He said, yeah, sure, go do whatever you got to do. Packed all my stuff, and I drove 13 hours because I was not in Toronto at the time. I was in the U.S. I drove as fast as I could, only stopping for gas, and then I missed her birth by an hour and a half. But when I got there, she was wrapped in a little blanket, and her face was perfectly clean. It looked like a porcelain doll. She wasn't crying or smiling or anything. She wasn't moving, just these big eyes. And she blinked. I was like, wow, she's not a doll. She's real, a real human. And I felt a duty, a sense of moral responsibility in that moment to her. And it was also important because at the time, while working at a pig farm, I saw all these piglets coming into existence. Piglets that we were intentionally bringing into existence. And I thought, if I feel so much moral responsibility and duty to my one child, surely there must be some more moral responsibility to all these piglets that are being brought into existence. I also thought this picture was appropriate because she's a superhero. And we often talk at our house about superheroes. And the difference, in my opinion, between a superhero and a supervillain, you guys should ask in your minds right now what you think the difference is. I think a supervillain takes from others so that they can benefit from their own greedy, selfish indulgences. Knowingly, consciously knowingly. Whereas a superhero does the exact opposite. He often, or she often, sacrifices herself for the benefit of others, to help others. And so, if I don't say it later, I guess I'll just say it now. I think everyone in this room is already vegan. Because your ideals, cultural values, cultural norms say that we should help others. That unnecessary violence, unnecessary suffering toward others is wrong. And we should avoid it whenever possible. Now, not all of us are living in alignment with our values, naturally. But the core values are there. All we have to do is assume that animals are others and that they count. So poultry, after my daughter was born, I went to North Carolina and I did a case on poultry in a poultry slaughterhouse. And so again, all these things are legal because that's what the industry does collectively. And the last point there, conscious scalding, is when the birds don't get their necks sliced by the machine, they don't get stunned by the bat, and then the backup killer somehow misses or doesn't do a good job. Which, if you've ever seen the line of a poultry slaughter line, it's like, how can you be 100% effective? You can't. It's too fast. So they call them red birds, because that means those birds were scalded alive, because they go into a hot bath after that. And by the industry's own admission, 1% of all birds are red birds. You think, oh, that's pretty good, 99% effective, you guys are doing a great job. But if you think about the numbers, billions of birds are slaughtered a year, so 1% even means millions of birds being scalded alive. I don't know if I can play this. This is just a quick video. You see the US DOT number on the truck? That is what we try to get, and then where they're going. Really simple. So now we know that that truck went to that specific location. What did that take? 5-6 seconds? The reason we do that, this is part of the case that we assemble as investigators. Imagine we said McDonald's is responsible for animal cruelty when in fact they're not responsible for that particular animal cruelty. Imagine the lawsuit we would have on our hands, or Mercy for Animals would have on their hands. So this is important. We have to make the connections very crystal clear. We have to know exactly who they're getting their products from and how they're connected to the farms or the slaughterhouses that we have investigated. Okay, so how investigations help. In 2013, MFA, Mercy for Animals, investigated a farm called Weiss Brothers Farms. And I actually helped on this case, but I wasn't the primary investigator. It was my friend AJ, the trilingual guy from Korea. And they were connected to Nestle. We didn't know that at the time, but we found out that they were connected to Nestle. Nestle is, as you can see at the bottom here, the result, the world's largest food company. Imagine how many animals they are responsible for. And the result of this particular investigation, just one investigation, changed the animal welfare policy for literally billions of animals. Across more than 90 countries, the company's new policy may be the most comprehensive and far-reaching animal welfare policy of its kind. I argue that at the time, it absolutely positively was, until California just recently passed their animal welfare legislation, so they've one-upped Nestle. But it was a great victory. It was a great win because billions of animals were affected by this one investigation. And yes, animals are still in cages. Yes, animals are still going to be slaughtered. But we have to make small, incremental steps towards a better world. And this is how we do it. When you sit down with Nestle, you can't say go vegan. You can't say eliminate animals from the food supply. So you have to come to a compromise. And this is one of the ways that we did. Okay, so ag laws. If you haven't figured out what I was saying before about passing a law that would make it illegal to take video footage of a farm or a slaughterhouse, that's what they call an ag law. Many states have passed them, but thankfully, in recent news, just in January of 2019, the ALDF, which stands for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and the ACLU, which is a human rights organization, has nothing to do with animals, joined forces and decided to file a lawsuit against the people who instated this ag law in Iowa. And the reason they chose Iowa, they also did it in Utah in 2015 and they were successful there. But they were focusing on Iowa because Iowa has the most factory farms out of any other state in the USA. And so the wording of their ag law was the most strongly worded one in the country. Not only were you not allowed to take a picture or a video clip, you also weren't allowed to possess a picture or a video clip of the inside of any animal-related facility in Iowa. That's how strongly worded it was. And they were felony charges. You would go to jail for years if you had a picture of a pig on a pig farm in Iowa. This is crazy, right? But this is reality. This is what was happening. So the ALDF and the ACLU joined forces, and thankfully a federal judge was rational enough to understand that this was unconstitutional. It's breaking our First Amendment. It's our freedom of speech. If you guys see something wrong, if you see a kid being abused, you should, in my opinion, you should be legally required to say something. You're certainly morally required to say something. But imagine somebody legally prevented you from saying something. It's unconstitutional. It's a violation of your First Amendment. So, we are beating the ag laws. Yay. But there's still a lot of work to do. Okay. Animal rights law. Are two very, very opposing moral philosophers. Can't get any further away on the spectrum. Immanuel Kant says we ought not to use others as a means to our end. And Jeremy Bentham takes a utilitarian approach and says we should maximize happiness and decrease suffering. But through both lenses, we can come to an understanding of animal rights. Whether you're a Kantian or a Benthian, utilitarian, you can come to animal rights. And that's what Tom Regan and Peter Singer did. Tom Regan famously wrote The Case for Animal Rights, where he argues that all mammals 1 year or older deserve legal basic rights. And he used the Kantian framework to argue that way. And Peter Singer, who wrote his book, Animal Liberation, in the 1970s, which, by the way, is considered the Bible by the animal rights advocates today, the Bible of the animal rights movement, argued from a utilitarian perspective that animals deserve more. They deserve better. And so the two of those philosophers agree on so much. And it's really intriguing that you can have two opposite extremes coming to the same conclusions. So the last point about compassion and justice, I want to bring this up because this is a law school, and I hope that everyone understands what I mean when I say this movement is not about compassion. Legal rights for animals is not about generosity. It's not about sympathy. It's not about being nice or sentimental. I don't like cats. I really don't. But if somebody was to torture a cat, I'm not being nice by saying that ought not to be done. This is a movement based on justice. It's a movement based on what the animals are owed. Just a sense of duty, a sense of fairness. These animals do not deserve to be in the conditions they're in. And so if we say, don't torture that animal, it's not because we're acting out of compassion. It's not because we're acting out of love or generosity or being nice. It's a matter of justice. It's what they deserve. So animals matter because they have more in common with us than they do not. They share brains, central nervous systems, skeletons, blood, flesh, hair, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, teeth, all the organs. We only have a little tiny piece in our brain that's slightly different from the chimpanzees. 98% of our genetic makeup is identical. And so from an evolutionary perspective, and there's a great book written by James Rachels, if you guys are interested, animals deserve more from us because we were created from them. And that means that we have so much in common. And I think that that's an important point because a lot of people use evolution as an excuse to justify might is right. But I argue the opposite. Because we share so much in common from an evolutionary perspective, we owe them more. Okay, so what can you guys do? Anyone know Justin Marcoux? Oh man, no one? I thought he was famous. University of Denver. He wrote the book Beyond Cages. He argues pretty convincingly that, and I agree with him, that we should spend fewer resources prosecuting animal abusers, that there is a room for that, we should still do that. But we spend way too much time and way too many resources doing that. Instead, we should spend more resources defending activists like Anita and Jen. Does anyone know Anita and Jen? Toronto-based activists. Anita was famous for the pig trial. She gave water to a pig in a slaughterhouse truck right before slaughter. She gave water to a pig. Water to a pig. And she was facing jail time. So lawyers defended her by talking about the basic necessities of a pig in a courtroom, and they won. So that set a legal precedent. Now people can give water to pigs. A hot summer day, they're going to get slaughtered, but at least they get that one drink of water. Jenny McQueen is now being charged with 10 years in prison because she trespassed and rescued a pig from a farm. So, if we can spend more resources holding institutions rather than individuals accountable, we will progress much faster. And so the lawyers of the world should spend time thinking about how. Be creative, because it's a hard one. It's a hard one to crack. We don't really know how. But I will tell you from my perspective of 3 years in the field, 99.7% of all the cruelty is because of the systematic abuse, the institutionalized abuse. It's not because of the sadistic psycho-torture. They're there too, but it's a small percentage. And that's what people focus on. And the institutions are happy when we focus on that, because then they just say, oh yeah, that guy, John, he was an ass. Get him out of here. Now our facility is perfectly good. And then they continue status quo. So we shouldn't focus on that. We should focus on institutional change. Okay. Investigators needed. If you want to be an investigator, these are the 6 questions that I always ask. Females can be an investigator too. In fact, we need female investigators. Being bilingual is a plus. If you have a criminal record, it's a strike, but it depends on what it is. Sometimes it can help you. Tattoos are okay too, but nothing that says V. And so depending on these questions, then I go to the next step. But those are the 6 questions I always ask anybody who's interested. Okay. This is my favorite part. You guys ready? 2079. No one is talking about this. Mainstream media, politicians, pop culture, no one is talking about slaughtering animals being illegal. Am I crazy to suggest that this might be a reality in just 60 years? Maybe. But here's my argument. In 2017, a nonprofit research organization named Animal Charity Evaluators, ACE, run by my good friend J.C. Reese, discovered that 47%, think about that number, 47% of people are already in favor of banning all slaughterhouses. You're like, no way, get out of here. Statistically, that's an anomaly. No way. That can't be accurate. So the meat industry heard about that, and they said, you know what, that can't be right. Let's do our own research. So they hired a third party, and that third party found exactly 47% of people are indeed in favor of banning all slaughterhouses. We're 3% away from a majority already. Is this really crazy? So, next point. The Good Food Institute, for anyone who doesn't know, is a nonprofit organization based in the USA. And according to the research, they say that people consider 3 main factors when purchasing their food: taste, price, and convenience. There are other factors, but statistically they don't matter. 3 factors matter. Taste, price, convenience. Taste, price, convenience. Taste, price, convenience. Those are the reasons we choose to eat what we eat. Okay, now, I want you to think about the Model T. In the early 1900s, before Ford released the Model T, which was the first car ever, everyone was riding around on a horse and carriage. And there were animal advocates. I can't imagine being part of that group and what they used to talk about. Probably must have been way ahead of their time. They advocated for better welfare for the horses, right? They wanted longer resting periods and more water and just better welfare standards for the horses. And nobody really listened to them. But then came the Model T. It was faster. It was more efficient. It was better in every single way. People lined up to get a new car, a horseless carriage. And so the Ford company was not trying to help animals or save animals. They were just trying to provide a good vehicle, a good invention that would help with transportation. But now, we're doing the same thing with food. So the question is the Model T out right now? Some say it is. I definitely say it's not. Because for me, the Model T inherently was more efficient than using a horse. We don't have a burger or a vegan anything that yet tastes better than the traditional animal product. And once we do, I'll call it the Model T. Some people could argue that point. I think, statistically speaking, that's what I'm basing that on. We're almost there. We're like 98%. And I think it's funny. You get to like 98% of the taste, texture, and feel and everything. You're like, oh, it's close. Not close enough. Kill the cow. Right? So you have to match it exactly. But imagine if we could match it exactly and then go beyond. Imagine we could create a better product. A product that tastes better, that is more convenient, more accessible, and cheaper. That's the future. And so, Beyond Meat, you guys I'm sure know, Impossible Foods, are doing exactly that. They're trying as hard as they can to come up with this next Model T. And just yesterday, $90 million collectively was invested by Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Richard Branson to find what I call the Model T. They're looking for the next vegan Impossible Burger. And so as these companies like Tyson Foods or Cargill Foods, which traditionally base their income on slaughtering animals, see that there are alternatives, that they can use plants instead of animals and still deliver the same experience or a better experience and maybe have a higher profit margin, they're going to jump on board very fast. In the same way that we didn't have iPhones 10 years ago. And now they're everywhere. Because they're better than what we had before. So, with regards to plants, I just want to say we started vegan meat substitutes in the 1970s, and they were really bad. I wasn't eating them then, but I can only imagine. But they were bad in 2002. And up until recent years, only 2 plants were cultivated to create vegan meat replacements. Soy and wheat. So if you wanted a soy-free, gluten-free vegan meat replacement, you were screwed. You had nothing. There was nothing. Recently, Beyond Meat, Hampton Creek, Impossible Foods started incorporating peas. Now they're using pea protein. There are 80,000 edible plant species on planet Earth. We have only cultivated 3. And we're already a multi-million-dollar market with 23% growth last year. 23% growth year over year in the plant-based meat sector. If we keep up 23%, animal agriculture will be completely displaced by 2050. Just keep those 3. Imagine the taste, the textures, the experiences that are waiting for us in the 79,997 other plants. So this is just the beginning. Okay, that's 1. 2, clean meat. I hope everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say clean meat, also known as cultured meat. Clean meat we've had around since the 1950s. If I burn my arm and I don't have any skin left here, they can take a little piece of my skin here and grow it in a petri dish, and my body will accept it here because it's my skin. They just grew it with a media solution. So we've had that technology available for many decades, but we've been only using it medically, in the medical world. And now we're applying that same technology to food. And in 2013, they created the first ever clean meat burger, which cost $300,000 US. Crazy, right? But they've significantly decreased the cost since then. And so inherently, when you feed food that we could be eating, by the way, to an animal, to grow it to slaughter weight, whether it's a chicken, a pig, a cow, doesn't matter, it's going to be inherently inefficient. Because you have to grow brains, you have to grow a skeleton, you have to grow ligaments, skin, fur, all the other stuff that we're not eating. Right? If you just want meat, that's a waste. And so with clean meat, you can do that. You can just create the meat. It's more efficient. Right now, it's still a little expensive, to be fair. And it's not on the market at all. But we predict they will drop the price below traditional animal agriculture and will be on the market within the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, one more point about clean meat, because I think this is the most exciting part. Anyone who's a craft beer enthusiast, think about a brewery that you like to go to. And think about your favorite craft beer. It's local, it's unique, it's different, because the guys at that particular brewery created it. You can do the same thing with clean meat. In fact, they're calling them clean meat breweries. So you'll have a giant vat with meat being made. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's a meat brewery just like a beer brewery. And so I predict in the next couple decades, you'll be able to go to a local restaurant and order a clean meat steak that was produced in-house, as well as your craft beer. And not just chickens, pigs, cows, sheep. That's boring. Why not rhinos or polar bears or bald eagles? How about a blend? How about a blend of ox, bison, pheasant? Twist that all together and have your own unique spices and put that on the plate. Again, we're talking about Model T, better than. So I predict that will be the case in the future, as well as clean meat. So you'll have 3 options on the shelf: plant-based meat, traditional animal agriculture, and clean meat. If they're all conveniently available, they're all similarly priced, who's going to pick the middle category? It destroys the environment, it kills animals, it kills your health. I predict that middle category will be obsolete by 2079. That's my presentation. Thank you.